Hello and welcome to the Emissaries of the Gospel podcast. My name is Jeremy Brown. I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about the Olympic Games, especially the opening ceremony, as well as some other information from that. We're going to talk about guns in schools, reform quirks, all kinds of stuff today. But before we get into that, please make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you haven't already and click the bell icon. That way you receive notice every time we put out content. It really, really helps this channel. And it also helps our evangelistic ministry where we drive back the darkness wherever it's prevalent. And that's through the soul-saving, life-saving, life-giving gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, that said, I wanted to jump right into it today. And so I'm going to bring up something that I saw on MSN.com. Once in a while, I go and see stuff that they have. I just look at some of the headlines and whatnot. And this one came from a story of things that, according to MSN.com, were very outdated, practices of the 60s and 70s that were very outdated. And this has to do with firearms in school. And of course, if I put that in the in the headline of the video, in the title of the video, then people will probably assume it has something to do with a school shooting, Columbine or Sandy Hook or one of these other well-known shootings, right? The one that happened to the Christian school in particular, right? That might jump into your minds, right? And I disagree with them that it's something that's outdated. I do think that it's something that right now we don't have a populace that is capable of handling that. We might in a private Christian school, right? But certainly not in our public schools, right? And it's because we have a degenerate populace, right? There's no other way to say it. We don't value and love life the way that people did just one generation ago. So these are pictures. This one right here, it's from 1947. And but even up to the 60s and 70s, you had shooting clubs in schools, or you had, a kid might be able to bring their shotgun or their rifle or whatever for show and tell. There were some schools that actually had gun ranges in the school, and so forth. And so even just into the 70s and 80s, being able to have a gun rack, at the in your truck in the high school parking lot, right? Someone might want to go bird hunting afterwards or deer hunting, and so they had their shotgun or their rifle maybe on the gun rack that's in their truck in the parking lot. Obviously, you might have risks of theft now, and of course, there's the presumed risk of some type of violent outburst, some type of murderous intent, and that kind of thing. And so, you don't see schools permitting this or encouraging this, whereas before it was even expected. Things were put on by the school, or it was just kind of a given. It was an accepted thing. It wasn't questioned. And the reason it wasn't questioned was because people knew that these students didn't have murderous intent in their hearts. They knew that they were using this for, extracurricular activity. They were coming for one of the school programs or classes that taught them how to use a gun, or, again, show and tell or whatever, right? Like this is, certainly the high school age kids were able to do this, but even when I grew up, younger kids were probably not in the more urban areas, I'm guessing, and maybe even certain types of suburban areas, but In other types of suburban areas, and certainly in rural areas, younger kids were very familiarized with firearms. I mean, they'd learn how to use firearms, at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's not a weird thing or something to laugh at or cringe at or be afraid of. These were children that were taught very seriously how to um, care for the life of their neighbor, right? So there was a element of, you know, defending the weak that was incorporated in that. Love your neighbor as yourself, and thou shalt not kill, the positive aspect of the sixth commandment, and all of these things. Self-defense, defending your home, the castle doctrine, right? These were things that just were taught to even the pagans would teach their kids these type of biblical principles, right? And so you had children learning how to responsibly and safely, not in every case, but in the overwhelming majority of cases, they learned how to be responsible and safe and competent with a firearm. So they wouldn't be afraid of them. They wouldn't be reckless with them. They wouldn't be dangerous with them, right? It was just taught. I mean, even like as a toddler, some kids might have their dad, bring them out into the woods with them when they're, bird hunting or something like that. There might be certain types of hunts that they wouldn't bring their kids on just because, it might be harder for them to sit still or to be quiet when they need to. But there's other types where, the child tromping through the woods and stuff would be fine. And so their dads would bring them with them, right? And so you would learn, you would become familiar. You'd see, dad is doing something here, right? And you kind of figured it out, right? But the one thing that was common here was that there was more of a respect for human life. So I wanted to read a couple of passages because these are the kind of things that we need to impress upon our churches and impress upon our children, because I think if you brought this up in certain churches, you'd get wild-eyed looks and stares, and people would, laugh or be in disbelief, or they'd think, even if they didn't say anything, maybe they would say something, but they'd think you're kind of crazy, right? They'd think you're wild. But honestly, if you taught a 6-year-old how to use a revolver, uh, or a 30-30 rifle or something, 12 gauge shotgun, even you probably with a kid at that age on their own, you'd probably want something like a 410, or maybe a 20 gauge, but just because of the recoil. But the fact is that you wouldn't have to be terrified that they're going to go and shoot everybody, right? And I don't mean even out of malice. I mean even out of recklessness, right? Because these would be trained children. They would understand the difference, right? They would understand that when you point the muzzle of the firearm at something, it's because you want to shoot it, you want to kill it, right? And so wanted to read this because this is upstream from abortion, right? Learning the value of human life and defending it, defending the weak, self-defense and defense of your home. The difference between, the righteous death penalty is an example for people who commit capital crimes, things that God says are capital crimes, versus, being vengeful, vigilante justice, quote unquote justice, and those kind of things. And yes, murder and violence and, abortion, which is part of that, right? So Proverbs 6:16-19, there are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. And then Exodus 23:7, keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. Isaiah 59:7-8, Their feet run to evil, and they are swift to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity. Desolation and destruction are in their highways. The way of peace they do not know. There is no justice in their paths. They have made their roads crooked. No one who treads on them knows peace. Right? Genesis 9:6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. Right? We should be able to teach this to our children. Right? So I just wanted to kind of bring those up because I think that it was just very interesting. I agree with them in the sense that in your public schools right now you don't have a populace of younger people, and I'd say even in the high schools where this should be mature. I mean, this should be young manhood and young womanhood. In those schools, you not only have kind of juveniles, really. And I don't mean in a arbitrary sense. I mean like in a mental, spiritual sense, right? That they're very juvenile, they're very immature. They're caught up and enslaved to all manner of sin, which includes anger and wrath. And you do not have an implicit love of life and respect and even reverence for the sanctity of human life, right? In fact, how often, even amongst the abolitionists and pro-lifers and that, how often do you hear the phrase the sanctity of life or sanctity of human life, whereas you might hear the right to life, but you don't hear the sanctity of life. And that used to be a phrase that I would hear at least somewhat often as I was growing up. And that begs the question of what happened, right? So anyhow, I want to move on because there was one other that I saw there that I found interesting. Oh, sorry about that, folks. And this was child discipline, right? And it was talking about spanking. And of course, they try to make it sound like the child is in danger, right? That discipline is danger, or that it's somehow violent, or there's going to be this deep injury to the child, right? And all of these things. And of course, this is just slanderous and foolishness. And we know better than that. So I just thought this was kind of a comical picture because the dad here, he's wearing an apron, looks kind of silly. He has a funny look on his face. The kid looks more outraged than scared, or maybe a little bit angry. And the mom, I don't even know what she's doing. So anyhow, I thought the picture was a little bit clever, but I did want to read passage on that. Couple passages actually. Proverbs 22:15 says, "Folly is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him." Proverbs 13:24, "Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him." Proverbs 29:15, "The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother." And I'm going to give you one more, but the gentle parenting people, the people who just have no discipline for their kids in reality, and their children basically rule their homes. Most of them, maybe not all of them, but most of them have rather ill-mannered children or narcissistic children, if I'm going to use a modern psychological term. I don't like to do that very often, but it seems to fit the bill. In this particular case, they raise kids to basically be full of sin, right? Self-centered, full of sin, defiant, and that's not good. Rebelling against authority in many ways, right? But let's just say that they had a well-adjusted, well-mannered child, right? And they say, Well, the rod that's being talked there is just instruction. It's metaphorical. It's not like actually talking about actually using corporal punishment, corporal discipline, such as spanking or having like a literal rod or whatever that you would spank your child with, right? And so I thought I'd read from the Bible on that too. Proverbs 23:13 to 14. Do not withhold discipline for a child if from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. So it talks very explicitly and clearly. It's unmistakable. It's not speaking metaphorically. It's talking about being struck with a rod. And then in the first one, the first iteration of that, it's saying he will not die. So obviously it's talking about, the child is being hit with a rod. He's not going to die. This isn't going to cripple him or anything like that. This is actually, as the passage says, is going to save his soul from Sheol, right? You are driving hell from him by appropriately disciplining him. And I think the image that they get here is that this is just going to be some furiously angry dad or maybe mom. They're out of control, and they just they grab a hold of the kid and whip them over, and they mercilessly beating them, even if they're paddling them on the backside or whatever. That it's just full of rage, and it's uncontrolled, violent, whatever. That there's no fruit of self-control with this parent, right? And that it doesn't come with instruction, doesn't come with any kind of love or any kind of grace afterwards, where okay, the child's been disciplined. Are they repentant? Are they being restored to the parent? Any of those kind of things, right? So they're kind of divorcing it from that automatically in their mind, presuppositionally. They're divorcing it from that, and that's wrong, obviously. But and I'd say even parents who know better and have good theology on this, obviously that is a sin that it's possible for them to fall into, right? And that they need to repent of. I don't think most of them would be, the abusive rage monsters that they're painted to be, even if they sinned in that. But it's definitely possible for them to discipline out of anger instead of out of love for the child and out of a knowledge of the necessity of it, right? And it's very easy, right? Very easy. I know, like, I've have daughter that I raised up. She wasn't really a difficult child, so physical discipline wasn't a big part of that. And certainly, you could ask her. She wouldn't have any pictures painted of angry dad, right? But I can tell you that there are other scenarios where it makes it much more difficult, right? Because there are some children that are very trying. They're gonna figure out what your buttons are, because that's what children do, right? I mean, just when you live in a family in an immediate context with people, you learn what bothers them, triggers them, whatever offends them. You learn what their weaknesses and their sins are, and sometimes you're tempted to exploit that, right? And certainly children are no exception of that, right? And so you're going to have that, right? But there needs to be self-control. But it's not, again, as MSM, or I'm sorry, MSN was saying, it's not an outdated practice, right? It's not something that we just learned better than, right? It's not something where we were in the darkness, but now we're in the light. It's not like that. So anyhow, I found those interesting, and I wanted to bring them up, especially because I was going to go into the topic of the Olympics, and I wanted to start out before I get into the opening ceremony, which I know is probably the part that many of you are interested in. I wanted to mention there's a Brazilian swimmer who was sent home from the Olympics. She basically was being disciplined because she and her boyfriend, who is also a swimmer for the men's team, were trying to leave the village or sneak out of the Olympic village that's set up without authorization, right? And um, depending on who's covering this story, they present it in an interesting way. In fact, sometimes if you look down through and you're thinking critically, it almost comes across as incoherent because you're like, well, what is going on here? And they're trying to present it in this way where the young woman almost looks like a victim, and she's not. She's not at all. Neither is the young man, but I'll tell you a little bit more about this in a second. So her name is Anna Carolina, and I think her last name is Vieira, right? And her boyfriend's name is Gabriel Santos, or Gabriel Santos, rather. I'm sorry, not Gabriel, Gabriel Santos. So they're Olympic relay swimmers, right? Now he got a warning, and she was made to go home. And if you just leave it at that and you don't go into the details, you might say, well, that's not fair. That's sexism, that's misogyny, that's unequal weights and measures, right? But as I read a little bit more about this to see what was up, they, there are times when they're allowed to leave the Olympic Village, right? That it's scheduled, it's already permitted. And then there are times when they're not allowed to unless they have authorization. They have to notify the team, and they get authorization and whatnot, and then they're permitted to leave, right? Which makes sense because you're in another country. Number one, you might have curfews and whatnot because of the rest that an athlete needs to be prepared because they're representing your country and the team is relying on them, right? And they're being supported over here. I mean, their country is paying for them to be over here, or not over here, but in Paris, right? They're paying for them to be there, and they're expecting that they are going to give proper performance, the best of their abilities. And obviously, if you have someone who's out partying, which is actually what they were going to go do, there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to perform the way that they should. So some of this is simply, having consideration for your teammates or coworkers, people that depend on you, having some semblance of knowledge that you're representing a group of other people, right? Especially you're representing your nation, right? But here's the other thing, they could be kidnapped, right? They could be killed, or any other manner of, horrible, violent crime could happen to them. And so this is a protection for them too, right? And so it's just completely irresponsible and reckless and careless and selfish for this young woman, this young man to try to sneak out and leave, right? I understand the temptation, but it's not like, it's not like this is Checkpoint Charlie, or something like that. They're not behind the Iron Wall or the Berlin Wall or whatever. They're not behind this. They're not behind this oppressive communist, you know, encampment, basically, where they're not allowed to leave just because they're never allowed to leave. No, this is you have certain restraints on you. They're there for a good reason. If you don't have a proper reason for leaving, then you need to follow the rules, right? That's plain and simple. And the reason she was booted and her boyfriend was just given a warning is because she had a very violent, disrespectful, confrontational response when she was told about this breaking of the rules and that there would be a consequence, right? So essentially, I don't know if they'll release more details on that, or video and whatnot, or audio. I don't think we necessarily need it, right? But just going from what the story said and recreating this somewhat based on what we know, it would appear, at this point, that they informed her of the breaking of the rules, which she was already well aware of, which is why they were sneaking out. And she flipped out, right? She got very heated to the point of at least being perceived as aggressive, if not violent, right? Um, and didn't like being held accountable, right? She did not want to be held accountable, and he had a more reasoned and possibly even humble response, basically accepting accountability and responsibility for his actions. And so he got a warning, and they basically said to her, "Nope, you're all done, right? You're going home." And so they made her go home. Allegedly, according to her, she had to go home so far without her belongings. And so, she's planning on suing or considering it. And, she's breaking her silence, right? You hear the phrase breaking the silence finally, like less than a, you know, less than a week or two after, after the events transpire, and you're talking about finally breaking the silence. I mean, this is ridiculous rhetoric to be using, right? But I, uh, I just thought this is really, you know, refusing to accept responsibility for your own actions and being held accountable. Like, um, there is an element of this where there are young women being raised up to believe that they don't need to be accountable to anyone, and that if someone does try to hold them accountable, then it's acceptable to have a meltdown, and it's not, right? But some of this goes beyond that, and it's just a general population-wide revolt against and hatred of any form of authority, and it's wrong. It's unbiblical. We should be able to see this, right? Like, God established certain authorities, certain types of hierarchies and whatnot in the different spheres of life, in the civil realm and the family realm and marriage and in the church, right? Um, and so this should be apparent to, like, this young woman, this young man, but apparently at the very least for her, she had a hard time accepting that, right? And so the other thing is, when you go, this isn't like the gulag or something. They're in a nice place, right? That has things to do, right? But even if it didn't, you're in nice accommodations, you're being fed well, treated well, you're relatively safe, right? So there really isn't like a good reason to leave. And I'm sorry, but just wanting to go party while you're at the Olympics. This is something where, like, if people are really into sports and training a sport and whatnot, like they dream of being able. What are the things they dream of? Being an Olympic caliber athlete, which is, generally speaking, you're the best of the best of the best at what you do, right? Or they dream of being a professional athlete. Right now, I'm not a big one for the idea of professional sports. I don't. I don't think that has been a good thing for us, or the obsession with sports that our culture has, and probably a lot of other cultures in the world, right? But nonetheless, if you are part of that and you are able to make it to the Olympics, you make the cut, right? How shameful is it that you would squander it all away simply because you want to insist on going to a party, right? Um, it's just ridiculous. But I thought it would be a interesting story to comment on for that reason. But then there's the big story that people have heard coming from the Olympics, and that's good old Dionysius here. And I'm being sarcastic saying good, right? I'm not going to keep this up for very long. And I tried to, as best I could, make sure that I didn't have any of the more unsavory elements pictured here. But all right, I'm going to remove that. But you have this mockery of the Last Supper, and I've heard people argue against it. Right? I've seen that there are those who acknowledge that that's what it was. I've seen that there were apologies being issued about this, and it was a pretty widespread understanding of that event. Right? That this was a mockery of the painting of the Last Supper, which was a picture of Jesus having the Passover meal with his disciples just before his crucifixion. So this would be picturing a very holy, reverent moment, something very special, something very sacred, right? And you have this perversion of it where you have drag queens, pagan imagery and all this grotesque, overt sexuality, being displayed here. You had a man, who there were parts of his genitalia were being exposed. We'll just say that you had drag queens, men dressing as women or whatnot. Just gross sexual imagery, gross pagan imagery in and of itself has no place anywhere in any public display. It just doesn't, right? It should be outlawed literally everywhere on the planet, right? There's no good argument for that. I'm sorry if you're someone who gets offended by that. There's something wrong with you, right? There's something wrong with you thinking that it's okay for children to see that. And yes, children watch the Olympics, and other than arguments about against sports, maybe there's no good reason that you can say that children shouldn't be watching that, right? And if you have that kind of display, there's an argument that even no adults should watch that. Like literally, no one should watch it. No one should be present because it's that grotesque and perverse, right? But I find it very difficult, hearing some arguments against it. Yes, I understand that that's supposed to be Dionysius pictured, right? And, some of these kind of arguments, but, the imagery there, the imaging that you're supposed to get is that they're elevating paganism above Christianity. That was one of the things. They're mocking the Last Supper, and you see the way that they're assembled and grouped at the table is like the same way. And people have shown this. Number one, they're all on one side of the table, right? Which is how the painting is depicted, but also the way that they're grouped, right? And you see that looks basically the same, right? And this is something that's rehearsed, and their movements, there weren't just natural movements, they were very staged, rehearsed, intentional movements of the participants that go to their specific place, and they're supposed to turn a certain way or whatever. So I find it very disingenuous that, I'm open to a much better argument than what I've heard so far. Now, do I think that they also intended to include this be an image of a feast for Dionysius? Yes, of course, right? But it doesn't change the fact that there was multiple things going on there, right? I thought, and this is, I guess, the first of the reformed quirks that I'm going to mention. I thought that was really weird that when this came out, there should be obvious outrage. Any mockery, first of all, any brazen showcase of such depraved sexual immorality, right? Such degeneracy, that alone should cause us to demand a response, right? To demand some accountability, right? That type of thing. There are certain things that you're not supposed to be able to say and do in public, right? There are certain things that are recognized by God, by the Scripture, by His people, right? Really by anyone who has any understanding of morality at all. There are certain things that you just can't publicly say or portray, right? Because it's recognized that those things are harmful and corrupting to the people, right? So there were certain limits that God put on being able to express yourself, right? So as an example, even though it is wrong, somebody might be able to say something that's considered vulgar or crass, right? But they are not permitted. You don't have a right to blaspheme. You don't have a right to blaspheme. By the way, there's always anti-blasphemy laws. Every culture has them. You just want to figure out which God is that of the culture that you're not allowed to blaspheme. You look and see who you're not allowed to criticize, right? Who are you not allowed to speak the truth about, right? So if a culture has, say, quote unquote hate speech laws, right, those are their anti-blasphemy laws, right? If you have a dictator in a country and you're not allowed to criticize them, right, that's an anti-blasphemy law, right? Every culture has them. And the difference being is that there's only one that can't be blasphemed, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ, right? Everybody else, everything else is open to criticism to some degree, right? Also proselytizing, openly, publicly proselytizing a false religion, practicing witchcraft or something devoted to a false god in public is not permissible. And so these are things that we should recover, and this should just be the going expectation, right? And so the fact that some people didn't even care about it. Like I don't even watch the Olympics, right? So I learn about this after the fact, but it is important, right? Because the things that you celebrate and the things that you promote is what's going to lead your society, right? It has a catechizing effect on the society. It numbs the conscience of the society, or it corrupts them, right? What you tolerate corrupts your people. So anyhow, I want to keep moving on, because one of the quirks that I saw, right, was the mention of the fact that the painting of the Last Supper is a second commandment violation, right? And I'm not going to do justice. I'm not going to go into everything on the second commandment here, because I think that would be worthy of at least one, if not a couple episodes. And I'm not going to do that right now. But there is something to be said there, right? It's they're not wrong that you shouldn't have second commandment violations, right? Although I do think you should be able to portray certain types of sacred things, right? Art is something that is good, right? And we need to regain an appreciation and recapture the idea of beauty and artistry and storytelling and those kind of things being important, and being important to conservative Christians, right? Reformed, evangelical, conservative, Bible believing Christians, right? It needs to be important to us. We need to use it. And not only do we need to use it, we need to be the best at it, right? We need to create world-class stuff and not just hand this over to the pagans who are going to use it for nothing but corruption. And they overtly planned to subvert and destroy beauty and replace it with chaos and just things that are grotesque, things that are objectively ugly or common, right? And so we need to retake that, and it shouldn't be hard ground to retake, honestly. Right, it might be hard in the institutional sense, right? But as far as just putting things out there that are objectively much more beautiful and profound than the ugly confusion and chaos and disorder that's put out there by, we should be able to do that quickly. But you have these people coming out and saying, well, we should be really offended about that. Well, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be offended about that. Yeah, I actually agree that there are second commandment violations that we should be offended by, right? And we should talk about that more and learn more about that and take that more seriously as the church as a whole, right? Like basically all of us should. It should become a cultural thing that we respect Christ enough that we're not going to try to portray his face and whatnot, like portray him. It used to be in movies that, you might see like some sandals and whatnot. And I understand that people might object to even that, but you'd see feet in sandals or whatnot, but you'd never see a face because someone's not supposed to portray the face of Jesus, right? And then others wouldn't portray Jesus at all physically, right? And so you have that kind of understanding, right? But I would say that that is a you know, reminding people, hey, you should be upset about this, and rightly so, and I'm right there with you. But also remember, hey, we should also be upset about Second Commandment violations when they're picturing the thing, kind of quote unquote rightly, right? When they're not intending to mock it, that there still should be an offense there, right? Um, okay, that's good, but it's really a weird flex, and I would say grossly inappropriate and completely missing the weightier matters, right? When you get upset about the painting made centuries ago that was at least an attempt to be reverent, right, and to picture something sacred, right? It was at least an attempt for that, even if it's a wrong-minded attempt, right? Even if they took too many liberties with their art. But now this new thing that we're encountering now, this is something that's intending to mock that, that's intending to be perverse. I mean, just the idea of having a drag queen is obviously a mockery of the image of God. It's a female by its very nature, right? And so picturing that in any format, in any context, is always going to be wrong, right? So we should definitely be taking offense to that. We should definitely find that offensive, right? Um, and so I think we kind of miss things maybe even entirely if we go and end up complaining about the second commandment violation, but we act like we're basically indifferent to that kind of thing, right? We don't want to do that. We don't want to be that person. So um, what's another reform quirk? Well, this one, I'm probably going to wrap up the episode with this one. I think I'd I might get two more in, but there's one I wanted to get to. I often talk about things that I see on social media because that's the new public forum, right? That's the new public square, right? Social media. Some people don't get it when they're in generations that, for most of their life, didn't have social media at all, and so they're in like maybe what's basically like the last quarter of their life, right? And they spent the first 3 quarters of their life without anything resembling social media, right? You had a public square, so you had like TV and news anchors and stuff, and they see that, they understand that, and that's like a not only a real thing, but that's a something that's taken seriously. It's a serious form of communication, right? And even further back, they might have had like a real public square where people went out in the town, and and people might rightly view the church as being a part of that too, right? And so um, don't always see that the social media has become the public square. Yes, we still have the church, and that's always going to be an important part of that. But this is where serious ideas get discussed publicly, right? So there is a sense where social media, it's not real life in the sense that you're sitting in someone's living room and you're physically there with them. It's not that, and we all know that, but it's as real life as the news broadcast on the TV. In fact, these days it's more so, right? So we should understand that in the public square, um, what you see that's prevalent um, should be stuff that uh, we look at and we evaluate. There are certain things that should be commented on and corrected and whatnot. And one of these things that I've seen is a guy that, like, his whole personality, it seems, he has a couple of Reformed traditions that are well within the Reformed faith, Reformed Christian orthodoxy. And so that doesn't mean that they're beyond criticism, but it does mean that they have a seat at the table. That these aren't unbelievers. These aren't people who are preaching something that we believe is some kind of like damnable heresy, right? It's not something that's so like heterodox that the church has never seen it or whatever. It's cause for alarm, right? That would be egalitarianism or something like that, guys, right? But they'll act like it is, right? And so that's a problem, right? Because you know we have people that can have charitable brotherly discussions on all sorts of things, right? Even a foundational thing such as whether or not the received text versus the critical text is the tradition that we should be following, right? And that's the very word of God, right? And we can rightly have um, brotherly, loving discussions with one another, and even debates where we passionately contend for our belief, but we treat the other person as though they have a seat at the table. They are part of the body. They're even possible, like if you have two reformed people who differ on that, they're part of our group, right? They're maybe not our group in the sense like we completely agree on this one very particular issue in exact detail, right? But as far as oh, okay, well, um, you know, you have your Presbyterians and your Reformed Baptists and whatnot, and we're all part of like the umbrella of the Reformed faith. Um, we can recognize one another as like, hey, you're still part of this group, all right? And so the reason I'm bringing this up and prefacing it this way is because when you make it your whole personality and your whole life's mission to criticize and fight against well established, even long term established um, divisions, I would say, and I guess it's appropriate word, but um, you know, sects or sects, right? Sects or certain corners of you know the Reformed Christian world. I don't find that to be incredibly fruitful right now. I'm not saying that it can't ever be. I'm not saying that we should never have those conversations or that they're unimportant or anything. I'm just saying that it's a very weird kind of flex for somebody to um, make that their mission, right? Like, I'm going to look for guys who are in some of the most biblically conservative groups of Christians, right? Who, they're, you know, iron sharpening iron, and some of these guys are out there preaching the gospel, and whether they're discipling people at work or they're sharing the gospel on the sidewalks and the street corners and the city parks and whatnot. They're going to college campuses, they're doing all these things. Some of these people are engaging our leaders, right? Whether it's in private meetings or over a cup of coffee, or whether it's at the town hall or whatever. So these guys are doing the work, right? Definitely doing the work, and they're solid, biblically conservative, Bible believing brothers and sisters in the faith, right? But brothers, really, I'm not saying that sisters are out there teaching and whatnot, but they are out there faithfully serving and in all the ways that God has ordained for them to do, right? And so there are going to be some of them there, but usually this tends to be brothers mostly going after other brothers, right? And I found it really intriguing that this one particular guy got offended because Elon Musk, right after this abomination that was the portrayal of Dionysius mocking the Last Supper, right? Um, Elon Musk sends out a couple of tweets, right, on X or whatever they're called now. I think they're still called tweets, right? But he posts on X and says Christianity in the West has become toothless, right? And then he posts something else that basically says, hey, if we don't fight for this, Christianity is going to be lost in the West, right? And Elon Musk is an unbeliever. So this gentleman got really offended because Elon Musk is an unbeliever. And so, if Christians are sharing this, it must mean that they think that Elon Musk is qualified to be a teacher of doctrine to Christians, and that they are following him as a teacher of doctrine, and they're encouraging other Christians to follow him as a teacher of doctrine. And that is like the stupidest take, really. I mean, Number one, all truth is God's truth. So if you see an unbeliever say something that's true, then we're not. Our first instinct should not be to dismiss that unbeliever, right? It should be to number one, praise God that there's something about the truth that this unbeliever is perceiving, right? Number two, in as much as it's useful and it demonstrates the issue, we should be using that, right? And it's not endorsing an unbeliever as though they're a teacher, a spiritual leader or guide or a teacher of doctrine. I mean, I think it's completely foolish, right? Completely foolish, especially when you double down and you really make it like a huge issue, right? That it's not even like a small issue and you're kind of like, oh, well, some people disagree with me. I'm just going to walk away from that one. But no, this one, this guy doesn't have understanding. So how can he say something? Well, you know what? It's very interesting to me that there are unbelievers who have been living in the actual blessings. So they're not stupid enough to call Drag Queen Story Hour a blessing of liberty, a la David French, right? We should not be listening to that guy. But no, they're living under the real blessings of the Christian religion, right? And Christendom, right? The Christian faith, Christian doctrine, the Bible has shaped our way of life here in the West and our practices and our customs and our culture. And it's shaped until recent years and recent decades, it's shaped our laws, right? That the case law that you find in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy and whatnot has very much overtly shaped our laws, right? And you can see this if you read from, Supreme Court justices and other judges and even other government officials, maybe not 100% of them, but the overwhelming majority of them, and is part of the Western tradition, and it's good and it's right and it's proper. It's part of Christian thinking, and it's in particular part of Reformed Christian thinking, that the law of God is supposed to have an effect, and it's supposed to instruct the civil magistrates on what is good and what is evil, how to rule over a nation, right? What should be legal and what shouldn't be legal, and even how to punish those things, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way we're supposed to think as Christians, right? Now, we may have some disagreement on to the extent of that and like the application of certain very specific things, but the general principles we should agree on, right? And then the other things we can disagree on. We don't have to have perfect agreement all the way down to like embrace some of the stuff. But these unbelievers, they've been living in the benefits of that. They have been blessed unbelievably by that. And now they see that the foundations have been eroding so badly that they didn't really care about before. Some of them even kind of cheered some of that stuff on, right? And now they're saying, well, we know what the problem is here. We see that all right. So sorry about that. Had some technical difficulties, but so yeah, we're not driving this bus as Christians, right? We're not at the controls, and the unbelievers are seeing that we're not at the controls, right? But it's not just that they're saying, because that they probably, if it was just that and nothing else, they would be happy about that, or they wouldn't care, right? But what they see is the fruit of the destruction of everything that has been built and established by Christians through biblical law and Christian thinking, whether it be the love of neighbor, whether it be not corrupting children, and all of the horrible fruit that comes from corrupting children, right? There's a reason why Jesus said, many reasons, not just one, but one of the many reasons is some of the fruit that we see, why Jesus said it's better for you to have a millstone hung around your neck and be cast into the sea than to cause one of these little ones to stumble, right? And so these unbelievers are seeing this. They're feeling the pain from this. They're recognizing the problem. They're even seeing stuff that's downstream. They know what's coming and it's not good, right? And so they kind of miss the fruits of Christianity, right? Some of them will be drawn to Christ because of that, and some of them won't be by God's sovereign choice, right? And either way, though, they're recognizing and they're kind of begging for us Christians to, like, fight, go do something, go change things, right? We need you back, come back, right? This is what they're saying. There, you have Richard Dawkins saying it, you have Elon Musk saying it, you have Joe Rogan saying it, you have all these guys out there from all kinds of different corners of the world that all different kinds of beliefs and whatever, and they're saying these things, and then you have some feckless, just I'm um, trying to say something that's not going to be going too far, but you have some guy over here who somehow thinks it's making him spiritually good and approved in God's eyes to do his little Jesus juke here. It's like going to a guy that says he's homeless and just saying be warm and well fed, right? When you have the ability to house him or put him in a hotel or something, um, that's it's no good, right? If you want to dismiss what this guy has to say, it should be because you are way down the road there on the whole cultural engagement thing, right? And bringing the gospel and all of the law of God and so forth, all the precepts in God's word to bear on the culture, whether it be out evangelizing, like I already mentioned, right? Many, if not most, of these faithful brothers that I know of do in one way, shape, or form, right? Or whether it be through implementing righteous laws and trying to convince righteous men to run for office and to hold positions of authority because they are actually qualified for that, whereas we've made a profession out of putting some of the most unqualified people out there. Right now we're starting to see, wait, this there's some rotten nasty fruit that comes from that, right? And so aren't the unbelievers. And so why in the world would you castigate an unbeliever, and just act so triggered by that when nobody, I mean, there may be some weird guy way out in the eastern corner of some little remote part of the reformed world or something that actually thinks that he's some kind of spiritual leader, but I highly doubt it. And certainly nobody else is saying that. Nobody of any consequence is saying that. And so it's just a really weird, and I'm going to say it. It's a dumb thing. It's a dumb thing. It's weird, right? I like how do you get caught up on that, right? And so these guys flip out about that, and that's like the wrong response, right? But you have there's more to it than that, though, because I engaged this person, and he got really offended with me, um, because keep in mind, part of his complaint was that this guy's an unbeliever, right? And so he gets upset with me because he thinks I need to share Reformed Baptist covenant theology more in, like, on social media, in groups and in the public realm and stuff, and that I need to make baptism, like credo baptism, my whole personality, right? And be fighting for credo baptism everywhere. Well, let me clue you in on something, man. Like, Baptist churches outnumber Paedo Baptist churches like 10-1 in this country, right? Number one, right? Number two, because the guy is an unbeliever, I care a lot more about evangelizing him, right, and seeking to teach him a better way, right, than I care about dismissing him and castigating everybody that's even paying any attention to what he's saying, right? And for what it's worth, anything that he says is true, I am going to put out there. The reason why people get so opposes them and their pietism, right? Where they're not doing anything, where they're not fighting for the things that they should be fighting for. These are guys that don't understand the times. These are guys who are not fighting the things that are the issues of the day, right? Just like you had the reformers and the Puritans and all these men who were fighting the particular issues of their day, the cultural issues of their day, the theological issues of their day, right? And they were in that fight, right? And you have these guys over here who um, they're they're fighting yesterday's theological issues and cultural issues. And when I say that, I don't really mean yesterday. I mean like 3 to 5 or 6 centuries ago issues, right? Where even their great 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 grandparents weren't a part of that fight, right? And so they live in the past, right, in a weird way, where I would say, if you want good teaching on baptism and you want to, I do think that there should be debates and discussions, and even sometimes on social media. But the best place for that to happen, because we have brothers, Credo Baptists and Pado Baptists are brothers. We're both in the Christian faith, right? That should be had through articles back and forth, or through a moderated debate, where we could access it on social media, right, like on YouTube or Facebook or wherever. This should be the type of thing that's being taught from our pulpits, right, or in Sunday school, or in one-on-one or small group type Bible studies, where you have a teacher of the church, one of the elders or whoever that the church authorizes for that, whatever man that they authorize for that, would be going and teaching that to the others, right? And yes, I think it's important that it's a man that's teaching that. We've done other episodes on that. Um, so, and the best way to make sure that people don't fall into error on covenant theology or on baptism is to teach it well, right? When you're constantly afraid that somebody's going to fall into some type of error and they're going to convert their stance on baptism, right? If you have the right stance on baptism or covenant theology or whatever, it's on you to teach it well and to teach it better than the other people. If they want to know about that, they're going to go looking for information, right? And so you want to make sure that they don't find bad information, insufficient information. You want to make sure that they get their questions answered, and that you teach it in a to the best of your abilities, in a way that they can understand and that's comprehensive, right? That makes sense, that you understand it well, right? And if you don't understand it well, then you should get so that you do. So number one, you don't act so dogmatic about something that you don't understand. And number two, so that you can teach it well, so that your people won't change their views, right? That's basically, the beginning and end of it, right? Um, but it's not, that's not the issue of the day, right? Pado Baptists and Credo Baptists are joining hands and need to continue to join hands, right? We're not in a culture where every single church has, one, two, three, or even 4 or 5 guys that they're paying full-time salaries to go out and do local evangelism, right? That they're going out on the streets and in the parks and, in front of the abortion clinics, into the city hall and town hall or whatever. And they're openly proclaiming the gospel there, and they're confronting whatever the darkness is, on the college campus or whatever, with the law of God and the light of the gospel, right? They're not, if we were doing that, then maybe we could be at a position where we have discussions about, okay, well, we don't need to be partnering with these guys in this work or whatever, because, everybody is Christian, or they're, coming to Christ, they're being discipled or whatever, and so now it's really, teaching them about these secondary issues, right? It's an important issue. It's very important. I'm not dismissive of it. It's very important, right? But it is secondary to whether or not they're in the faith, and in some ways radically outside of the faith, right? Yes, everybody who's outside of the faith is equally outside of the faith, in the sense that, they're all going to hell. But there is a difference between people who are outside of the faith in, say, like the 1910s, right, before the world wars and all that, and their idea of morality and civil order and all of those kind of things, justice and stuff. Did they have some wrong conclusions? You bet, right? But most of what they thought was framed in a biblical worldview, right? They knew they were living in God's world, and they shook their fist at him and rejected him or whatever. But you could reason with that person, right? They had the same general understandings of a lot of these things, and they weren't trying to tear the whole society away from Christ. And they might even send their kids to a Christian school, right? Or their kids might go to church, with your kids or whatever, right? But it is different, is completely different. Culturally, completely different mindset, completely different set of values, right? Completely different way of even understanding how they obtain knowledge, right? How the world operates. I mean, we're talking about vast chasms of differences, right? So when you're in that situation in maybe 1910 or whatever, right? You might be able to posit that argument. I still don't think it's the best attitude to take. I think we should be joining hands, both our Credo Baptist and our Paedo Baptist brothers. As long as you're in Christ, you follow the one true Trinitarian Most High God, right? You see Christ as Lord, right? Or Christ as King, and you have the Orthodox gospel, right? You're right on justification. So as the Protestants made sure to fight for that, we're saved by grace alone, through faith alone in the Lord Jesus Christ alone, right? Um, and to the glory of God alone, right? So, um, if you have that, then you should be able to join hands with one another on some level, right? There should be some amount of agreement that could cause us to be able to have fellowship with one another and to be able to minister together. Maybe not elders in a church together or whatever, but certainly going out and sharing the gospel and confronting this wild wickedness and craziness and madness that goes on, in your local city council, or your county commission, or your state representatives, in the state capitol, and all these things, in your courthouses and so forth, right? Um, so I see guys who are just really failing to address or do any work at all in those areas, who don't recognize any of these massive problems in the church and the way the church isn't thinking even remotely biblically. That you have people who are professing that they're not only Christian, but they're Reformed Christians, and their understanding of these types of issues is so far contrary to what the Scripture teaches, that their understanding of things like gender, even, which is basic. It's like literally Christianity 101. It's worldview 101, right? Right after God is male and female, right? It is created order. It's basic created order. And they don't even, have a even close to a biblical understanding of that, right? And then you have this guy out here saying, oh, we should be worried about arguing about baptism. Well, if I make sure these people are Christians, and then I make sure that they're actually accepting God's created order and God's law, and they again, because they're saved, they understand the gospel. Those are the big things right out of the gate, right? Um, these are the areas where we need to focus, and especially on things like justice. God calls justice one of the weightier matters of the law. Jesus said it, Matthew 23:23, right? So it's unconscionable that we would have people who would try to steer their brothers and sisters away from doing anything culturally whatsoever, anything politically, voting, anything culturally, anything bringing the gospel out. They'll say something about bringing the gospel out, but really what they mean is, just guys preaching in their pulpit on Sunday, regardless of whether or not they have visitors, and regardless of whether or not those visitors are already saved and going to some other church, versus whether you got some guy from the local park, or from the YMCA, or from your work or whatever, that is coming to church. So these pietist guys, I just think they don't understand the times at all. They don't understand what the pressing issues of the day are, and it just ends up looking ridiculous, right? My whole personality is not that I'm going to argue for credo baptism, right? That just seems stupid. I mean, don't get me wrong, if somebody has studied that issue their whole life and they've dedicated themselves to studying that so deeply, and everything that's been written on it, and all of the languages, and they're they're looking at all of our ancient manuscripts and all of the writings of the early church fathers, and so on and so forth, right? And and they're like an apologist for their particular position, and they really have like a educational position within the body, right? I see that as worthwhile, right? I respect those men, right? But these other guys who just go out there, and that's not them at all, right? They're just there because they think, oh well, my big thing is I'm just gonna go out and I'm gonna constantly attack one or two positions for no good reason that are in the body. They hold to a set of beliefs that is consistent with our Reformed confessions that we accept. And someone who accepts the same confession as me, which by the way, I accept the 1689 Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, right? And so these guys, okay, this guy, I'm a 1689 guy, that guy's a 1689 guy, but he disagrees with me on this one area, right? It's really, really weird to make that your point of attack, right? And really kind of just fixate on it, like you hate having a difference on that, especially when these people might even be more consistent with the reformers than you are, right? It's wild to me. You're more consistent with the Puritans than you are, right? I heard a guy the other day talking about, like, he was slandering the Puritans because of the Salem witch trials, right? And yeah, that was a bad point of history. They made a couple mistakes, but the United States does more injustice and worse injustice than that on literally a daily basis, every day, right? Certainly every year. So the fact that we have decades and decades of this gross injustice that is stacked up, and somebody has the temerity to sit there and point fingers at the Puritans, right? Because there was some error somewhere along the line in their ruling, right? I mean, that's preposterous. That's again, it's one of those things that's just dumb, right? If you sit there and look at it, and you put things in context and perspective, it's just dumb, right? Because they weren't absolutely unfailingly perfect in everything that they did, then you're going to sit there and denigrate them while you're sitting there in a nation that has drag queen story hour. You have books for children at your local library in the children's section that teach them how to do grotesque, perverse sexual things in some of the most conservative counties in the whole United States. Right? Give me a break, right? You have people arguing about whether or not you should have a man in blue body paint with his genitals exposed, right? And you're going to come tell me that there was something wrong with the Puritans? Give me a break, right? Are you even Christian when you're saying that? I mean, think about what you're saying. Yes, I believe, by the way, that this is a brother in Christ and that he's a Christian. I firmly believe that, right? But you got to ask yourself these questions, right? Like, how in the world do you get so twisted and lost in your thinking that you prioritize things that are secondary issues, right? And I'm not saying they're not important, but they're secondary, right? You got to be a man of the times, understand the times, right? You got to understand the issues of the day, right? And it's not that you learn from history so you don't make yesterday's mistakes, but you don't live in history as though that's the only thing to look at and focus on, right? That's being foolish, right? I see this in some of our political discussions too, where you'll have Christians that will say, oh well, because so and so, let's just take the Salem witch trials, right? So and so made error in the past, right? And so we're so terrified that will happen again that we're going to reject good, right, proper biblical thinking, reformed thinking on the law and politics and justice and civil rulership and all that. We're going to reject what like everyone thought in favor of paganism, which is what pluralism really is, right? It's a placeholder for paganism, right? And you're going to accept that because somehow that the gross injustice and constant corruption and perversion and denigration and disruption of society that happens, and your whole family and all of your descendants, they get oppressed by that somehow that's worth it, just so that way you don't have a Christian doing something imperfectly, even if they're doing it with excellence, right? It's wild. It's madness. Like, I can't believe people even think that way. So I'm going to read a couple scriptures, and then I'm gonna end. 1 Corinthians 1:10, I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree and there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and same judgment. 1 Peter 3:8, finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind. Psalm 133:1, Behold, how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. Ephesians 4:3, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Philippians 2:2, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. I understand that we may have some doctrinal disagreements that make that a little bit more difficult, right? We don't have an apostle right there with us, someone who is on the level where they could write authoritative scripture, right, to tell us who's right and who's wrong, right? We do have the Bible, though, and we have what is sufficient, not only to be saved, but for every good work, right? So we should be able to have at least the humble mind and the love, the brotherly love that we're supposed to have, where we can have a general sense of unity, and the areas that we have disagreements on, that we could recognize like there is a godly way to handle those disagreements, right? And to work them out, and to work forward towards that full unity that we desire, instead of this I see people like they'll revile others, they'll slander them, and all of these things. By the way, slander. Some of you think, oh, people use that word, so they must not have a good definition of it. When you publicly say something that is untrue about another brother to cause them to be dismissed, to damage their reputation, or in any other way to bring any form of trouble upon them, right? You are slandering them. You don't tell public lies about other people, or things that you aren't 100% sure are true. You don't repeat them publicly or make statements as though you have authority or confidence on that matter, right? You just don't do that. That is slander by definition, right? It's also lying, or joining hands with a liar, or joining hands with a slanderer, right? So you really need to think about that. Right? We should be a people that does not accept a false charge, and that doesn't make them. We don't make malicious accusations, right? That is way beneath God's people, and it is a violation of the ninth commandment. So with that being said, I'm going to end the episode here. I hope it was a blessing to you. Make sure you share this out. Hit the like button, smash that like button. If you didn't like this, you can tap on that thumbs down button twice. Again, we'd love to hear from you. So if you have any feedback, any pushback, encouragement, or anything else, make sure to leave us a comment. Until next time, may God bless you.